Greetings once again, Graeme.
Greetings, Doru. Hope you are well.
It is, yeah. Well, look, even though I'm not, knowing that we'll have another festival of,
Oh dear.
I don't know, for rather than of heart and mind, yeah, that quickens me.
Okay, that's good.
So I joyfully drove through the lazy city back home to catch up with you, and it's again such a joy, such an honor. It has been
The
uh,
honor's mine.
a wonderful opportunity for me to learn from you, to interact with you. It's been an enlightening experience, and I noticed that people started to enjoy watching the video recordings. By the way, I don't know what happens because I mentioned last time the fourth conversation. Now everyone watches that one.
Okay.
Hopefully they'll get to the end of the series. From my viewpoint, the last two have been quite intense. So yeah, maybe people, watchers, viewers move on from the fourth conversation. Yeah. And yeah, so in principle, if we finish today, this would be the last regular session. And let's anticipate a bit what I promised I'll say at the end. That's just me. Graeme kindly agreed to have a Q&A, public stuff with audience via Zoom. And it will be on the 4th of September. It's a Wednesday in these parts of the world, both Auckland and Sydney. It'll be 8 p.m. in Auckland, 6 p.m. in Sydney, so Australia's East Coast. But those who might be interested in interacting with Graeme, I'd kindly ask them to throw me an email or a message via YouTube, via Facebook, where I'll be doing some advertising, or LinkedIn, and we'll take it from there. Now, let's get to the good part, at least from my viewpoint. So we are at the last two stanzas of Graeme's narrative of everything, as I call it. The appendix to his wonderful article, The Primal Testament, maybe to refresh our memory, the viewers, I mean, and to just give a brief, I don't know, background information to those who happen to just watch this one first. Would you explain briefly, please, what's the Primal Testament?
Right. Well, as believers in God's revelation in Christ, we accept that our authoritative witness to that is in the Hebrew Scriptures, which we call the Old Testament, and the New Testament, which is the witness to the Logos, the true word of God, Jesus. But there is another text which is written in great detail, and we carry that around in ourselves. It's DNA, of which
Not in our pockets.
It's everywhere. That's right. It's a huge text of two sets of 3,000 million letters. If the DNA in every cell was put end to end, it would be 2 meters long. So it's an amazing text, and it is a record of our own history. And it tells us an enormous amount about our evolution in great detail, back 60 million years anyhow, which is the dawn of the fully placental mammals, and also beyond that. So I was just thinking this morning as I was going for my walk, listening to the bird song, how the birds are the survivors of the dinosaurs. And the closest relative of the birds are now known to be the crocodiles, because all the other dinosaurian, non-avian dinosaurs were wiped out 66 million years ago. But this sort of thing can be inferred by studying the text in our cells that we carry around on us. So it is an authoritative text that's not normative in the sense of our behavior, of our ethics, our morality, but it is normative and it is authoritative in the sense that it tells us the history that God has ordained.
And this is practically something that Graeme has addressed one way or the other via a series of 4 articles published in the Eschatological journal, Christian Perspectives on Science and Technology. But as co-editor of the journal, I was extremely surprised, but pleasantly so, when Graeme asked me if he could append the 4th article by this poem, which I keep calling a narrative of everything. I don't know if you like this phrase.
No, that's fair enough.
This is what it reads like to me. And let me just share for a moment the beginning of the poem for those who haven't seen it before. Oops. Oh, that's already the article. Okay, so a freedman's worship, the point of it all. Yeah? This is appendix to an article, The Primal Testament, Parallels Between Evolutionary and Biblical History, published very recently, in July. And it's available for free for whoever wishes to read this article and the poem. It's available on the journal of, the website of the journal. Once again, Christian Perspectives on Science and Technology. What we did so far, we went through the poem in, well, more or less analytical fashion. We haven't addressed all the verses where Graeme actually captures these 2 viewpoints on our history, let's call it theological narrative and the scientific narrative of our story, of our history. And those who are already familiar with previous conversations know that we had a lot of fun here, and sometimes got into a bit of, I don't know, dead ends and stuff like that. And overall, regardless of whatever difficulties we might have encountered along the way, this proved to be a very enriching experience, at least for me. And the feedback that I got already from certain viewers, some of them openly via comments on the recordings, others privately via email. The impression is very good. It's very positive. So we did something that was and is worthwhile. And once again, my gratitude, Graeme, for your generosity. Okay, so we went through a lot of history, but now we are getting to the part that perhaps some Christians don't feel quite comfortable with. Although we already had lots of events, cataclysms that somehow challenge the thinking. We might have the classical idea of providence and so on and so forth, evolution, transformation, changes that are already written in our genes and in our bones and in our blood and whatever, written all over. And now we get to the last two stanzas, and the next one on our list is actually science. After we did Jesus, we did Israel, we did the new creation, the church. Now we get to science. Okay, adventures.
Right. So this is almost a little bit of a parenthesis, the one on science. But I justify putting it here because, in a real sense, science is a gift of God's revelation of himself. It's a gift of the concept of creation. And certainly we can think of science as being, at least the historical sciences are what I've tried to unify in this poem. So it's very compatible with the way that we as Christians look at history. It's God's history.
And it's very interesting, the way you did throughout this poem, not only the very documented research articles you have produced in this series, but even in this poem, you managed to bring together these two viewpoints, faith-based or theological and scientific, in such a skillful way that personally I couldn't say that you infringed upon the territory of one from the viewpoint of the other. So this takes a lot of wisdom, and I have to say it. This is clearly the outcome of many years, not only of research, but also of reflection and prayerfulness. And it's really a lesson that should be pondered, reflected upon by, first of all, many believers who might feel uneasy about science, might feel uneasy about having written in their flesh and blood a whole history that predates what we would call the human genus. Is it a genus?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so this just looks at the fact that although it's not generally recognized, there is cogent evidence that the presuppositions upon which science is based are biblical. They come from the Jews, in other words. So this is not pretending that the geographical origins of science or modern science in Europe in any way reflect European intelligence, because it doesn't. Rather, the European thought was influenced by the scriptures. So in tribal myth, spirits, gods, trees, sky are blended and should not be disturbed. The gods might be offended. But for Hebrew tribes only, creations transcended, de-deified. God's world may be comprehended. The gods of the Greeks are conniving, capricious, but Israel's God, sovereign, truthful, judicious, consistent and lawful, the world God created, the gift of the gospel, science is just stated. The Stoic world cycles through endless reversions, so lassitude undermines research exertions. But the God who redeems acts through history's flows. The cause and effects linear time that science knows. God's nature is goodness, and God's world must be good. Our glad confidence in the world's preciousness would enhance nature's beauty before wandering eyes to aid and abet growth of the science enterprise. God made nature and freedom. The world is contingent. So researchers explore humbly and with most stringent empiricality and hypothesis testing to review nature's laws, the prized fruit of their questing. The glory of God and the good of humanity underlie science, which may seek to inanity by the pursuit of prestige and of monetary gain. Science is God's gift, is divine largesse in vain. Lord, you are the truth, and when you are rejected, integrity needed for science is neglected. When deaf to your logos, existential thought rules, we create our own truth. Will we wink out like fools? Conspiracy theories pollute even God's church. Where's the spirit of truth? Are we back in the lurch? Addicted to falsehood, reckless ideation. Dare we hope God will not abandon creation? So I guess this stanza connects with the others by considering what God has done in his glory and his wisdom, but recognizing that we have a capacity, that creation has a capacity to go wrong when we go our own way. And at least some writers are very concerned that science in a post-Christian world may not survive.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, I was influenced at the beginning of my career by an article by a Canadian philosopher and chemist, Walter Thorson. And he made that very somber assessment that the Christian conviction of truth, which is God's truth, and God is the guarantor of truth, is also the guarantor of science. But as we turn to existential thought and we create our own truth, and truth is relative and there is no truth, then science, in fact, will be undermined in a very wide sense.
Even
technology can continue, but science is the quest to understand, is dependent upon a very particular worldview.
even in this, let's call it secularized version of it, does it still need God?
I would say it does in the long term, because God is the guarantor of truth. That's why I speak of the spirit of truth. I've referred already to a book I'm currently reading called God and the Good. And it's not from a Christian perspective by any means, but when people sink into a purely naturalistic, materialistic viewpoint, then morality has no objective reality. And we are left with either one of two things, that perhaps we cannot find the basis of morality, or even worse, there is no objective basis to morality. It is purely our preference. So that's looking at one particular area where if we check out God, the story of God in the world is the basis for my understanding of moral truth, then what are we left with?
But then let me play the devil's advocate. I'm no scientist, of course. I'm a believer of sorts.
Yes.
But if there's no God, there's no morality, then couldn't an atheist or agnostic scientist say, well, actually, science doesn't deal with morality?
No, indeed. I was just using that as an example of how abandonment of faith in God can lead to relativism.
That's obvious. Because
yes. And also relativism, understanding of truth.
Yeah. Well, we've seen this happening in the last 3.5 centuries, at least, with this sort of secularizing drive that did away with God and then did away with morality, and we sort of feel the outcomes of of this abandonment in the name of science, of a theological perspective on life, and of course the embodiment of that perspective, which is what we would call, generally speaking, morality. And the outcome is really the disorientation of most Westerners, who have been sort of captivated by this new narrative that, well, actually, there's no responsibility to speak of, and we don't respond for anything. There have been attempts at fixing the problem by creating, establishing, let's call them secular ethical principles. But of course, that's very relative, because it depends on me, myself, and I, whether or not I want to adhere to any code, ethical code, or not. And yes, of course, objectivity is lost, at least on this front. But again, from a let's call it purely scientific, or rather positivist kind of understanding of science, there's always this objection that, well, sorry, people, but science doesn't deal with morality, and we cannot derive from our science anything resembling your values of right and wrong, good and evil. I remember reading in the 90s a booklet by Dawkins, A River, I think, Springing from Eden or something like that. I don't remember the exact title. It was a short thing in the Science Masters series. And that's his eschatology, you know. His eschatology, genetic eschatology, is that we are actually just witnesses of what our genes desire, aspire to, and they just want to replicate and survive. There's no other finality, there's no other purpose to it, and there's no morality to it. Is this, Graeme, is this more sophisticated secular new atheism kind of survival of the fittest? What do you reckon? When he says the only plan, say, of the genes is just to survive. They don't have any other code of ethics.
I mean, I think that's a very minimalistic sort of metaphor, because of course DNA is not, we can't personalize DNA, and I think even many people have been tripped up by this selfish gene concept. Of course, genes can't be selfish. DNA is not able to have a drive of its own. It is life which has this amazing drive. So we shouldn't sink to this sort of minimalism in which we give personality, as it were, to DNA. It's life which has this amazing, which is endowed with this amazing capacity for self-preservation. So the selfish gene concept, selfishness simply means that life has this capacity to propagate. Sorry, I haven't quite answered your question, I don't think, Doru, but
yeah, well, yeah, you did, because you mentioned this minimalism. So
it's reductionism, an extreme sort of materialistic reductionism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's, is there more a scientist can say apart from what Dawkins managed to put in a few words in such a reductionist a way?
Oh, right. Okay. So the thing is that when a scientist enters the lab or goes into the field, he or she decides that we leave our personhood. Have we talked about this? No, the science is powerful because of the modesty of its expectations. We will study only matter and energy in time and place. So the scientist voluntarily leaves at the door considerations of morality and beauty and politics and philosophy and religion and God and right and wrong and justice and all these things. Now, that does not mean that none of those things exist. It simply means that the scientist voluntarily, when he or she sets out to ply their trade, leave these things at the door. And when they come out as persons again, they talk in terms of morality and beauty and right and wrong and all of these other rich concepts which make us human.
Which is very interesting. And it means then that the new atheist agenda is just their choice not to return to those values, isn't it?
Exactly right. I mean, they leave immaterial things at the door. They do their science on material things, and then they come up with this ridiculous conclusion. There are no immaterial things. Hey, hang on. We've decided we will not study those because we cannot measure them. So they are making a conclusion out of a methodological presupposition of science. So that is the one of the big weaknesses of all this naturalistic stuff, that there's only physics, when we've decided that we will just study matter and energy in time and place.
Yeah, so that's so important for all of us to keep returning to this nuance. Because of course I don't have to tell you this, you are the scientist, but especially for people this side of the fence, non-scientists, but claiming to have a worldview informed by science.
Right.
The problem is always that, well, it's the science that prevents me from thinking of the other side, the other aspect, is there something else? I can't even ask the question. It's impertinent to ask the question if there's something else apart from my self-imposed or self-inflicted reductionist worldview. People
Right.
forget that it's self-inflicted. There's nothing objective to it. It's a personal choice. I don't want to get out of my lab or extract my nose from the equations I'm fiddling with to see that originally it has been my choice to leave out something.
Yeah, it's a necessary precondition of doing science, that we concentrate on the physical. Have I mentioned to you, Doru, in this series, some of the wonderful T-shirts I've seen? I saw a boy once in a hospital with a T-shirt emblazoned upon which was, "There shall be no rules," which of course is the rule. It's very funny. It appeals to my sense of humor. But so does the scientific position. Science is the only way of knowing. But that's philosophical. That's a philosophical statement which says science is the only way of knowing. That's a metaphysical statement which says physics is the only reality there is. So the statement of scientism or materialism is inherently self-contradictory, because they are making it's a physical statement that there are no metaphysics.
Yeah. Yeah.
But coming back to the end of science, the incredible widespread attack on vaccine biology right through the educated West has been amazing. How deeply has, sorry?
The conspiracy theories mentioned at the end of the stanza.
Conspiracy theories, yeah. I mean, how widespread is this rejection of science now in the general popular understanding? Same with climate change science. Same with the tobacco industry and other industries who have sought to undermine people's rationality and their belief in evidence.
Yeah. So you have on the one hand, scientific reductionism, which leaves out a whole universe of, let's call them values,
Yes.
traditional values, or
Yes.
historically tested values.
Yes.
Uh, and then you have a new mythos emerging that science can solve everything. And then the first failure in terms of scientific expectations, or that the sciences can sort out everything or anything, then we turn to some kind of mythology that, instead of bringing us back to those values that we left out in the first place, we create we create a new culture, a new universe of disbelief, deception, illusion, delusion.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and this leads to nihilism, isn't it?
It
So
is, exactly.
so from scientific reductionism, leaving out history and tradition, culture, and so on and so forth,
Mm.
you cannot avoid, because the sciences cannot sort out everything. They are as limited as their creators. You rather. Um, and because of the impasses that they might experience, they give rise, because they have abandoned wisdom in the first place, they give rise to stupidity. Yeah.
I would say so, yes.
This is the conspiracy theories with whatever carrot-looking colored celebrities preaching drinking bleach and no change and stuff like that, because he knows better than the whole scientific community. And this is just because the sciences didn't live up to the promise that they made. So there's an original sin here, but not that original sin that we're talking about in theology. It's some kind of original sin, a hubris of modernity, which began with this reductionist worldview, where we abandoned everything that didn't seem tested by our reason and by our instruments and by our algorithms and so on and so forth. We thought that we sorted things out. In 19th century, I think, or 18th century already, they announced at the end of all scientific quest, because we were almost there, knowing everything. And when people started to believe in this myth and realize that there are cracks in the wall, they abandoned science. And now we live in a dark age where people don't believe anything apart from bad news and deceptions coming from people like Trump and others.
That is increasingly so, yes. So I guess it's a human tendency. Science is God's gift. And I've given various reasons in that poem why.
Okay, you have to return to that, because I wanted to push you. Sorry for this. I
Yes.
pushed you towards this gloomy side of things,
Yeah.
which is our current reality.
Yeah. We go for the gift, we forget the giver.
Okay, so how do we then justify your claim that science is still a gift of God? Because this is where most people, fail to see how Christianity can reconcile itself with this new culture. On the one hand, scientific arrogance. On the other hand, the people who are disappointed and turn to mythology.
Because we need to go back to the dawn of science. I mean, these days it's easy to do science because it works. We know it works. There are 4 centuries of science working. But going back to the scientific revolution of the 17th century and before that, you needed presuppositions which were not current. for example, people brought up on the Greek idea of starting off with self-evident axioms and then deducing everything else. That doesn't work because nature is contingent. And to the early scientists, as that poem says, God made nature in freedom. So we can't deduce. We can't trust our sense of what is self-evident. Instead, we have to observe and experiment. So the freedom of God connected with the contingency of nature, nature doesn't have to be the way it is, necessitates the experimental approach. So it can be argued that the experimental approach was a consequence of biblical theology. To many people, creation is evil. Mind is superior over matter. Certainly some of the Greek schools and, Plato, the spirit leaves the prison of the body, the Gnostics, Eastern religions, some of them. But in the Bible, God is good. He declared his creation to be good, indeed, very good. And so that the sweetness of this assessment in Scripture, surely it gave the early scientists the motivation to look at creation because it's so good. And another thing the poem mentions is science is that creation was de-deified.
Yep.
Now, to many of the early people, most tribal religions, the gods, the ancestors, magic, it's all tied up with the rocks and you can't separate them. But to the Hebrews, there is a transcendent God, a duality of the divine and of his world, God's world. So it's not a dualism which separates things radically, but an interacting duality. God is separate from his world, God's world. And because of that, we can study the world without prying into the activity of the gods.
Yeah, without profanizing or whatever.
Yeah, profanity. Yes, that's right.
And without desacralizing nature, because nature isn't God, actually.
Yes, that's right. So these historians call this de-divinization of nature, the de-divinization or the de-deification of nature, which was essential because if you believe that God is in this desk, if you believe in a pantheistic sort of system, then that will be a big demotivation to studying nature.
It'll be the end of science.
It would. That's right. Desacralization, at least some authors make a difference between de-deification and desacralization. Creation is still holy because it belongs to God. So in that sense, it is still sacred. It is not ours to destroy. But de-deification or de-theologization or whatever,
Yeah.
which takes God, which makes a separation between God and his world allowed for the study of the world.
And there's not another aspect that you sort of touched on in the early verses of the stanza, the fact that God creates through the logos.
Yeah.
And if we take etymologically the word logos, usually translated in the scriptures as word of God, it's not just word, it's also principle or measure or principle and
reason, yes. Yeah.
And reason and so on and so forth. And we could say that God sort of paved the way for what we call science, because creating through the logos, creating through a principle, a reason, a measure, God put into things, let's call them, in the universe, in this created reality, laws.
Yes.
And even I think I read this in Paul Davis, maybe, that the actual concept of natural laws is our modern way of talking about what through the scriptures we learned about God's laws.
Yes, certainly that would be the Christian position. I'd be surprised if Paul Davis says that, unless he was referring back to what actually happened.
Yeah. He says, well, scholasticism sort of transferred the scriptural laws of God.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
Into this language of natural laws, if I remember correctly.
No, I'm sure Peter Harrison would say that too, a good Australian.
Yeah.
That this concept of natural laws comes from a conviction of the rationality of God.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've got a whole crowd of gods who are fighting and scrapping, and they're capricious and all the rest of it, then you don't have this confidence.
Yeah.
That there is a supreme the peerless author of the rationality we find in nature.
By the way, Peter Harrison actually would contest one of your assumptions that
that's good.
A good creator creates a good world. Well, that's obviously what we believe in.
Yes.
But Peter, as a good Protestant, reminds us about the fall, which is considered in several branches of Christianity an ontological catastrophe, to borrow from one of your previous phrases, where the nature of things is so damaged, including our rationality, damaged, that there is a way for us to express, let's call it a bit of creativity, but not in spiritual terms, more in terms of technological prowess and scientific discovery.
Yes.
And he says actually the fall explains the birth of science.
That's partly because people like Francis Bacon, promoted science as a means of reversing the effects of the fall. So that's a two-edged sword. And he's, the idea is we can't trust our rationality because it's distorted by the fall, by sin. Therefore, we have to experiment. So yeah, the fall, it's
complicated things.
Different ways.
Let's stick to the idea that science is a gift of God, and regardless of what we said or not already, I think this is a very important concept for us to ponder as Christians, first and foremost, because once again, regardless of where we are at in terms of the outcomes of sin or the fall or whatever we want to call it, things are in motion that are not entirely dependent on us. And if we believe in a God who creates and is provident caretaker of the creation, then there are put in place certain aspects, phenomena, movements, powers, whatever, that make possible even this expression of human creativity, which is the scientific quest. And insofar as we accept this, then the sciences are as much God's gifts as anything else that we might be able to produce from the arts, poetry, good theology, not bad theology, from the evil one. Yeah, and there's room for the sciences in our lives as believers as much as there's room for music, for the visual arts, for morality, for the spiritual quest, and so on and so forth.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it's a tragedy that so many Christians regard science as somehow a bad thing, or they regard it with suspicion.
At least useless to their quest.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Let's move on then to the last stanza, which wraps things up.
So it's the eschaton. So we've looked at every step, and it seems often that we have spoiled things that God has made, but we look forward now to when God will finally bring his long-term history to its conclusion. Quantum void, hot big bang, stellar fires, God ordained. Desert earth, complex goo, simple cells, God maintained. Life, beasts, and then people, Israel, church, God sustained. In them God's plan was gestated, good purpose contained. Now God's kingdom's concealed, it seems merely latent. Then, wondrous surprise, God's just will be patent. Now beauty is haunting and we cannot hold it. Then beauty is lasting, with joy we'll enfold it. When first sight of mountain, forest, coastline enthralls, with subsequent seeing, the high ecstasy palls. But Father, Son, glory, creation transcending, we'll witness enraptured in awe never ending. Lord, your ways with people show uniformity, not of despotic might, of cruciformity. New creations cost to you profound enormity. Till then, help us follow in full conformity. You make things of wonder from the crudest of dross. The supreme paradigm, that most hideous cross. To us, cogent symbol of love fully expressed, of your mercy supreme, grace by which we are blessed. As players in your saga of suffering to glory, we'll see the denouement of your cosmic story. Your plan for the ages, from mute matter begun, is to fill new creation with folks like your son. The point of the journey, this painful biosis, imbued with your life by the sun's great kenosis, to arrive at a creature, the apotheosis, a dull primate enwrapped into loving theosis. The spirit's vitality, end of all thirsting. The spring of the water of life, gushing, bursting forth, filling us as the pure source of our being, with your truth fully known, with acuity seeing. In full obedience, Jesus went to the cross to offer all people zoe aionios. For groaning creation, he's omega, telos, the true goal and purpose, the final eschatos. The most wondrous secrets inhere in the Trinity. We'll learn, rejoice, worship through time's great infinity. To wonder at those eternal scars on the Lamb. To rejoice in the love of the triune I am.
Beautiful. There is practically a summary of the entire narrative, of the entire poem.
It's intended to look right back at all the dross. Yep, this little speck of cosmic dust. Yeah, the bolide, human weakness. To see what God is bringing to perfection through the cross. Suffering to glory. Amazing theme of the New Testament. Suffering to glory.
And we are still surprised when we look back. We read again this history of ours.
Yes.
We discover moments that we missed, and we discover nuances that bring to light truths that we ignored. And all this harks back, according to your stanza, to that moment that tremendous surprise when God embraced that cross,
Yes.
which instead of being, I don't know, a hopeless moment in our history,
Yes.
it becomes the source of renewal, the source of more surprises, of beauty, of wondrous surprise, beauty lusting, beauty haunting.
Yeah. Totally counterintuitive.
So it's like a transformation of all that dust of the earth, of that mold, of that whatever goo, and so on and so
Yes.
forth,
Right.
through an act of self-sacrifice,
Yes.
blood shedding, bloodletting on the part of the Logos incarnate,
Yes.
that actually washes everything clean and plants the seeds
Yes.
of renewal, of beauty, of wonder.
Yes. In fact, you mentioned incarnate. God taking a body of stardust, the body of a primate.
The body of the universe, because
Yeah.
in that primate, yeah, as
Yeah.
stardust, all the elements of the universe.
That's right. As Tom Wright says, Jesus and himself represented Israel. On the cross, he represented Israel and the world. He represented Israel and the universe. So that all of reality in him comes to its transformation.
My Maximus the Confessor,
Yes.
a bit of an ancient, yeah, speaks of our new realization about the world, about the universe in the light of the incarnation, and he calls the cosmos, the world, phenomeni logo sarx, the visible flesh of the Logos. So only now, in the light of the incarnation, in the light of that cross, in the light of that tragedy, of the light of that suffering and human failure to acknowledge what was happening, now we can decipher everything and realize that he came down from heaven not just to visit, but to put on all this. And in so doing, God has adopted everything, the very flesh of the universe, as God's own. God interiorized the creation by becoming one of us. Hence, the power of resurrection present in all things. Yeah, go on.
Just everything is renewed.
Yeah, and again, going back to Maximus, whom I studied for years, not so much of late. In a book that I mentioned a while ago, the Mystagogy, it's a liturgical ecclesiological treatise, chapter 7. I still know my Maximus. There's something so powerful there, it's not a poetic narrative like yours, but sounds quite similar. And he contemplates the end, the eschaton, as a moment when we people realize that being actually made of the same stuff of the universe, we will undertake together with the universe the same resurrection. We'll realize that it's not just about us, it's about everything else. God's creation, the entire creation, will be renewed, or at that moment, whatever that moment is like, we will realize that the power of restoration, renewal, resurrection is given to all of God's creation. And everything is then redeemed. Everything that was broken is fixed. Everything that was squashed and splintered and smashed and so on and so forth will be put back together, but in a more beautiful way. Hence your sequence of beauty haunting, beauty wondrous,
Yes.
beauty surprising.
Yes, we can't hold it. It's, we take, I think Christians understand beauty as pointing us beyond. But here we can't, it always seems to slip through our fingers. Because it's pointing us to when beauty will be established and when, by God's grace, it won't slip away, but it'll be something we can hold on to and cherish and fully enjoy.
Is this a way of learning, by contemplating this future glory of the creation? Is this a way of learning how to enjoy our time in the here and now? Can it be like a retroversion or retrospective? We look into that future of beauty, of splendor,
Yes.
in order to learn something about us in the world today?
I guess it can. I mean, I hadn't thought of it like that, but the beauty which we see slipping away from us all the time, we know points us to the future. It is a proleptic moment of wonder, which comes to us from God's world. And we look forward to it. We look forward to a new heavens and a new earth where righteousness will be at home. So, yeah.
Renewal and this finalization of God's plan, God's intention for the creation ends in beauty. Is this also a way of looking at Genesis 1 with, because you refer to the chapter before, it's good and very good indeed. You
Yes.
said very good. Is this a reason for us to look at Genesis 1 as a gospel of the age to come, where everything will be indeed beautiful,
Yes.
very beautiful?
I think so, yes, because the current creation is incomplete. I think we talked about that a previous time. And I know some of the Australian Eschaton people have said that, and I've read it in other places, that this creation is incomplete. So it's beautiful. It's good for its purpose. It's good for what it is without being the end product. So the goodness of creation, it's a potential which God has for it, which hopefully comes through as this poem as I think about it. It's always had this potential, but that potential is realized in the work of the Messiah, in the work of Christ. And so we look forward to seeing that good brought to its perfection. But yes, it's already there in an incomplete form. And to my mind, God knew what he was up to when in creation, that it could only achieve its permanent beauty by God's own self-surrender in his Son, by his own self-giving, his own pouring out of his life, his power, the power that is God's alone. He had to pour that out into an incomplete creation to bring it to its final.
But the creation meant for goodness and beauty.
Yes, it was already intended for that, always intended for that. Surely.
Yeah, I return from time to time when I think of Genesis 1 to a line that I found in Basil of Caesarea in his homilies on the Hexameron, when he deals with the first verses, he actually says something that is really mind-blowing, that this is a prophecy future. Everything
Right.
that we see in the past tense. And I think he echoes a tradition of interpretation which, from my viewpoint, comes from Justin Martyr, the so-called
Okay.
prophetic perfect, like a grammatical
Right. Okay.
whatever
Yeah.
approach to history. And it's a matter of talking in the past tense about things to come.
Right.
And
Interesting. Very interesting.
Basil reads Genesis 1 not as referring so much to how the world was created, the myth of the ages, you know, the golden age, then silver, bronze, and so on. He reads it prophetically.
Okay.
And he says, well, this is actually a revelation of what God intends for the world to be. This is something that the world will become at some point, and maybe this is why the New Testament, or rather the Christian scriptures, end with two chapters that actually are symmetrically located to mirror the first two chapters of Genesis.
So which ones are these then? Sorry,
the last two chapters of
the last two.
of
Okay.
Revelation.
Of Revelation. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Because it's the same story. You have Genesis 1, you have heaven and earth. Revelation 21, new heaven, new earth.
Right.
Genesis 2 speaks of the garden and the tree.
The trees. Yeah.
First and foremost, the tree of life in my story.
Yes.
And Revelation 22, the last chapter.
Yeah, the trees which bear fruit for the healing of the nations.
In the middle of a city. It's no longer a garden. So it's a built world. In other words, even our stupid input will be safeguarded, transformed in that age to come. But in the middle of the new garden, the city, is the tree of life, the same tree of life. So the makers of the Christian scriptures deliberately placed at the end of the New Testament two chapters that actually mirror what we see in the first two chapters of Genesis. And the story becomes, in this light of Revelation, the story of Genesis is no longer a story of the origins. It is a story of the end time, when the Sabbath of God within the creation, not from the creation, because this is what Sabbath means. To be in, to stay in. It's not a matter of ceasing activity. It's a matter of finding rest within. This is what Sabbath means. To find rest and joy in staying there, being there. And doesn't come as a surprise the fact that Revelation 21, I think, already proclaims in words that are similar to those of John 1, that God pitched his tent among us. And John's gospel is full of a Greek version of the Shabbat, the Sabbath of God, the verb menin.
Right.
To be there, to remain in, to not to leave, to be there, resting in God, resting with the disciples, resting in the world, resting in beauty, resting in goodness. And you know, it all comes together as a prophecy about the Eschaton, about the beauty that you are celebrating in this last stanza, the beauty that will be the beauty of creation and the goodness of creation and the nobility and the immortality and the glory of the creation of God. which was promised, but never attained as such. An imperfect creation, as you said. And then I think, if we think eschatologically, as you invite us with this stanza, many issues can be solved for us Christians, because the stumbling block is our interpretation of Genesis in the past tense, not the prophetic past tense, not the prophetic perfect, as something that, something that actually happened. I don't want to wipe out the historicity of Genesis, but at least the first 2 chapters seem to me, in the light of our discussion and what I sort of found here, there in various early Christian theologians, that the first 2 chapters, at least, if not the first 3 chapters, are more about things to come rather than things that were. Or perhaps Genesis 3 is an explanation of history, as in a tragic history of wrong choices. But the first 2 chapters are the beautiful promise of a beautiful world.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah.
What prompted this emphasis in your poem on beauty? You know, I'm staggered, stunned, dazed and confused, because the scriptures you read, translated from the Hebrew, as you do, that's not my case. For the Orthodox, we translate from the Septuagint. God did not create a beautiful world. God created a good world, isn't it? Tov in Hebrew. Yeah?
Okay.
Whereas the Greek has kalos, which can be translated after a fashion as good, but it actually means beautiful. So,
is it really? Okay.
Yeah. So
Yes.
what the Septuagint, the first translation of the Hebrew scriptures into any other language, what the Septuagint reads is that the world made a beautiful world.
Okay.
Looked at the light, and it was kalos, beautiful. Look at
really?
plants, look at the animals, and
Yes.
they were kali, plural. Yeah.
Okay.
Everything is beautiful.
Right. Okay.
And for the Orthodox mind, your message, let me read again, beauty haunting, beauty lasting, beauty that surprises us. Yeah, this sounds very Greek to me.
Okay, that's good.
And makes your poem very relevant to my worldview.
Good.
So
Right.
again, what prompted this turn to beauty rather than, let's say, the Hebrew goodness?
I can't say, Doru, offhand. I know I was impressed when I once read C.S. Lewis and his journey to faith. And he speaks of when he was growing up, that there were moments of what he called joy. They were really haunting, moving moments of seeing beauty in something small, a little miniature garden or something, just seeing beauty which was painful because it went. And maybe, maybe he's thinking in a Greek way as well, because it helped him to see that there is a hunger for what is beautiful. And I do see beauty as one of the things which is one of these universal, which points to God. It points beyond this world, because here it's, I look at a new view, and the first time it really moves me, and the second time I've lost it, and I want more of that first impression of the beauty of the place, but I can't get it back. I was thinking just as this evening was coming. Now, I wrote that poem when my wife was healthy and well in last year. and she died at the beginning of this year. And there are various ways of grieving. And to me, the loss of my wife has been the loss of something beautiful in my life. It's that idea of beauty, which I wasn't thinking of when I wrote the poem. And since then, sometimes, not often, but sometimes when I have listened to beautiful music, the Messiah, for example, something beautiful brings me to tears. It always has, but maybe more now, because it speaks of the fact that we can't hold beauty here. But it does make the new creation more desirable, more urgent, more tangible, more real. In fact, I wrote a little poem could I read just a small amount of it at my wife's funeral service, a celebration. And obviously this is based on partly on John chapter 14. I go to prepare a place for you. Now Jean has gone from me in inexpressible pain. She's gone to God's own place in comparable gain. She's gone from us, our hearts ache beyond telling. But wonder, she's gone to the Father's glad dwelling. She's gone from our space-time, her loss sustained weeping, but gone to the sheepfold for the shepherd's safekeeping. She once described joy as being spiritual pleasure. Here it is partial, but there hers beyond measure. Wrapped with the Son's sacrifice, she sings to his praise. His resurrection now hers, the goal of her day. Jean and I alike abide close to God's loving heart. In union with the triune God, we are not far apart. So the beauty that haunts us now, and that pains us when it's gone, points us to the time when it will be in our hands again.
So the whole history of life is repeated in our lives, our personal lives, and you went through destruction, my friend.
Yeah.
And now you are heading towards the resurrection. Amen to that.
And all beauty will be embodied in the triune God.
Thank God there's a God.
Yeah. As you say, we look forward to it. Whatever beauty is past is really pointing us to that greater beauty, which will be manifested to us one day. That's which we know in the gospel. Now.
Well, this is a very moving conclusion to our journey together with Graeme Finlay, Dr. Graeme Finlay.
Just Graeme.
So the history of the universe and life and God's people and everyone else. And it's been a privilege to accompany you. I apologize for whatever obstacles I have erected.
No, indeed. You're so full of insights, Doru.
Or the
I hope I can remember them. I mean, the Sabbath is, just remind me again what that Sabbath is. It's the sense of dwelling. It's a sense of
dwelling.
Really, really.
Just stay there. It's not cessation. It's not departure.
Yes.
Sabbath is to rest in, which is
Yes.
precisely the meaning of the verb, one of the central verbs of John's Gospel, menin.
Menin.
Yeah. To rest in, to find enjoyment and peace by being there, not by living. Abiding in God, the actual home. Yeah.
Well, it's John 15, isn't it? Abide in me and I will abide in you. That's
It's
Menin about 8 times, I think, or 10 times in that.
all through the gospel, but the words, yes, at the Last Supper, yeah, that's more and more emphatically present.
Yes.
You and me, I and them,
Yes.
stay together, find rest in me, whatever,
So
everything.
when you say the en, or in union with, which is how the Good News Bible translates it, that all comes back to this concept of residing in, dwelling in.
Yeah.
Menin is in.
Yeah, and the incarnation, to return to one of the most powerful topics of your poem, the incarnation is actually God pitching God's tent in our midst.
Yes.
And again, like a promise. So
Yeah.
we have a first promise at the end of the days of creation, first verses in Genesis 2. We have the second promise, well, yeah, through the Old Testament, or what we call the Old Testament, we had the same idea of divine human fellowship. John 1 actually is the instrument that leads to that fellowship as a very factual, tangible reality. God pitching God's tent in our midst. And Revelation 21, a proclamation. John, the author of Revelation, hears a voice proclaiming God's presence in the midst of the people.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it also ties in with what my professor, Adrian said, the covenant. I will be their God and they will be my people. And that's 20 or 30 times right through Scripture. Right through Scripture. And it's there, of course, at the end. I will be their God. Now the home of God is with man. They will live with him, and that's Revelation 20 or 21, isn't it?
Anyone?
I will be their God. That's the consummation of the covenant, right through. I will be their God, and they will be my
people. Graeme. I'll be missing these conversations. You have to write another poem, or we take it from the scratch because I need more of it.
Thank you, Doru. No, it's been very rich. The things you've said also. Those early church fathers, I haven't really spent much time in them, but obviously just a Bachelor of Theology and a bit of church history, but they had some wonderful insights.
They loved God.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you once again. Such a privilege and enriching experience for me and for the viewers. Much gratitude, Graeme. And thank God for your generosity. Once again, the announcement we made earlier today. Graeme agreed to have another meeting with public, a Q&A session on the topics that he addresses in this poem, maybe also in the article or the series of articles.
I have to read them again. I've forgotten what they are.
Which the poem crowns. Anyway, we will have this Q&A session on the 4th of September in Auckland and Sydney. That's a Wednesday for us. In Auckland at 8 p.m., in Sydney 6 p.m. Those who are interested, please contact if you know Graeme, contact him. If you know me, contact me. But we'll do some advertising to set up the rules of engagement. So it will be a Zoom sessions, not on YouTube. And of course, we invite whoever will be interested in joining Graeme and ask questions, make comments, interact with him to do so. Meanwhile, may God bless us all. And thank you once again, Graeme. May God bless you with beauty and joy.
Thank you, Doru, and you.
Amen.